For further analysis, let's bring in UNRWA spokesperson Jonathan Fowler in Amman in Jordan. Jonathan, welcome. So earlier in the show, we were discussing Israel's delay in reopening that Rafah border crossing. I want to ask you firstly, how much aid does UNRWA have in its warehouses over the border from Gaza in Egypt and Jordan?
So in Jordan and Egypt, we have, in terms of food, we have enough food for the entire population of the Gaza Strip for about 3 months. And UNRWA, we're responsible for about 50% of the UN aid stocks, which are sitting outside the Gaza Strip. So this is achingly close. You know, the warehouses in Egypt are right there next to Gaza, and the ones in Jordan, you know, just a few hours drive away. So, I mean, our aid needs to be able to get in. We need to get it in without delay. Lives depend on it.
And how many trucks are currently being allowed through, Jonathan? And once those trucks start coming through, how many truckloads of aid will it take to stop famine or famine-like conditions from continuing to spread in the enclave?
Well, I want to emphasize that, unfortunately, I mean, when the Israeli authorities placed a total ban on aid coming in from March through to May, and then in May they lifted it partially for some humanitarian actors, UNRWA, unfortunately, they haven't lifted the ban on us bringing in aid. So, I mean, our stocks are outside the Gaza Strip. We cannot bring them in currently. So I can't speak to UNRWA trucks coming over because there's nothing. We're not allowed to. And that in itself is shocking, and the ban must be lifted. Otherwise, I mean, other parts of the United Nations system, the commercial sector, you know, trucks are beginning to move in, but it's a trickle, and it has to be not even a flow. You know, it has to be like a flood of humanitarian aid immediately into the Gaza Strip. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And you know, we see reports of, you know, several hundred here, several hundred there, maybe half a dozen from one agency or another. You know, the benchmark that was set in the agreement was about 600 a day, but that's not so that people sort of live life to the full. This is the minimum survival need. This is what was used, the benchmark that was used in the first ceasefire in January to March of this year. But the point is, of course, the population has been thrown into a man-made famine as a result of the previous total ban on aid. So now people are in a much worse situation than they were even in January. So, you know, that benchmark is really a minimum, and it has to be surpassed. Certainly not, you know, half of that amount be allowed in.
How do you feel, Jonathan, when you see, I guess, the celebrations we've seen over the last few days of phase one being complete? That's in quotation marks, of course, of the hostages and the prisoners being released. But of course, elements of phase one remain very much incomplete. As you say, UNRWA unable to send trucks across the border when we know that there is an ongoing famine in the enclave. So how do you feel when you see those sort of comments from the president that phase one's complete, we're ready to move on to phase two?
I mean, I don't speak to comments from individual leaders, but I mean, we all see the context, which is, I mean, there has to be a momentum, put it that way. So it is about moving from one phase to the next. There's no doubt about that. The question is, you know, sort of full implementation of each phase. Is that the thing that is required for then to move to the next phase? I mean, the priority absolutely has to be the well-being of the population of the Gaza Strip. There's no doubt about that. I mean, in the meantime, of course, even though we're not able to get aid across because we're not allowed to, we have 12,000 team members who have been working tirelessly throughout this war inside the Gaza Strip, Palestinian team members. More than 370 of them have been killed, which is unprecedented in the history of the United Nations for UN team members. And they're continuing to do medical consultations. They're doing water, sanitation, learning activities for children, psychological support for trauma survivors, these kind of things. So that work continues. But the point is that operationally, we need to be able to do our work right across the humanitarian chain. So however aid gets in, the aid needs to be distributed. And this is where we come in, because that's what we're doing already, and we need to be able to scale up. But the key thing, as I said, is that the momentum must continue. You know, there can't be backsliding in terms of the ceasefire, because we need a sustainable ceasefire to move towards lasting peace.
Jonathan Fowler, UNRWA spokesperson, live for us here on TRT World. Thank you so much.